You're listening to Southern Fried Sports with Travis Reier on Tide 100.9 in Tuscaloosa. Is Southern Fried Sports with Bama Online senior analyst Travis Reier on your home for Alabama sports. Tide 100.9 and streaming on the Tide 100.9 app.
Make it through this year, I think I'm gonna put this bottle down. I guess as time goes on, I'll grow to miss it less than I will now. And I think I'm gonna tell her that I'm gonna go away for a while, till I can get this demon out.
It is 11 a.m. on a gorgeous Tuesday morning in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. It is time once again for Southern Fried Sports on your home for University of Alabama Athletics. Tide 100.9 FM. Travis Reier, senior analyst for BamaOnline.com, part of the 247sports.com. We're with you each and every weekday morning from 11 a.m. until noon. The show, as always, brought to you by Peterbrook Chocolatier, 1530 McFarland Boulevard North in the Indian Hills section of Tuscaloosa. The countdown to Easter Sunday is on. Get by Peterbrook today. Make that Easter basket just right. Give them a call also. It's 205-752-0211. The Chocolate Lady and that outstanding staff, they can take care of you start to finish Easter 2021. Do it right with Peterbrook Chocolatier. Joined on the program by the executive producer of Southern Fried Sports, Mr. Jacob Harrison. Together we combine to form the 60-bit of Sports Talk Radio. Jacob Harrison is extremely excited right now because it is 11 a.m. and not just because it is his favorite show. Well, one of his favorite shows besides his show, Off the Edge. It's another pro day at the University of Alabama. The coverage coming on the SEC network right now as they're taking you to the Hank Crisp Indoor Facility. Mac Jones going to throw for some San Francisco 49er coaches and administrators of note. Some late updates here on maybe Devontae Smith trying to run a few routes for Mac Jones. So a lot to uncover here, a lot to reveal here in the next couple of hours, Jacob Harris. I know you're excited about that.
I'm extremely excited, and just about the time your show was starting, James Palmer reported that Devontae Smith will be running some routes. So even though his finger's not 100%, so plenty to be excited about. I still am kind of curious about the whole Mac Jones. Is it a smokescreen thing? And we're not exactly going to learn anything about that, but get to see Najee in action a little bit too. So plenty to be excited about. There's at least credence for there being a second pro day, at least. We will see new things.
Greg McElroy, by the way, the Alabama National Championship quarterback from the 2009 team, is at the Hank Crisp Indoor Facility for the SEC Network coverage. So Greg providing some insight for the SEC Network. Greg, a little bit of a razor strike this morning. I can respect it. You know, it's early in the week. You're not quite ready to shave on a Tuesday, but Greg's there, and you got full coverage. And we'll certainly keep you updated here. Some other notes of interest from this second pro day in as many weeks over at the University of Alabama. Apparently, Najee Harris will go through some drill work, but he will not run. You do have Bill Belichick on hand, New England Patriots head coach, as promised. Kyle Shanahan, head coach of the San Francisco 49ers, is in the building. He of the preferred flat bill caps. I don't know how I feel about that, Jacob Harrison, when it comes to NFL head coaches and flat bills, but it looks like Sean Payton. Looks like New Orleans Saints head coach Sean Payton is on hand for the workouts today. So The big boys, Jacob Harrison, John Lynch, general manager for the San Francisco 49ers. In terms of guests, in terms of onlookers, it looks as billed as we expected for this second of 2 pro days.
About the same as last week. Last week everybody, most teams sent GMs and head coaches, and those that didn't have now done it this go around. Tommy Paradise sent something last night on my show that had me thinking on that smoke screen, though. Everybody's going to have their eyes on Kyle Shanahan and kind of seeing where he's looking, who he's talking to. What if the smoke screen is real, and he's not here to talk to Mac Jones, but to talk to Devontae Smith, and the Dolphins just bought it hook, line, and sinker and may have missed out on one of their major targets?
If the Niners go up there for Devontae, and you're the Dolphins, you probably think, though, with this wide receiver group, you're still okay. I mean, unless you just have Devontae with a grade far above Jamar Chase or Jalen Waddle, you should still be okay, right, where the Dolphins are picking, if, in fact, the Niners do go. Maybe it's a Jerry Rice pick. Yesterday I was talking so much about Mac, and I want that number 16 jersey brought out of retirement for the 49ers. If it is Mac to the Niners, maybe you bring 80 out of retirement for Devontae Smith. See a little Jerry Rice and Devontae? Huh? You see where I'm going with this, Jacob? Or is it too early in the program for all that nonsense?
It might be a little blasphemous for me to let you have your fun with Joe. I don't know if I could do the same thing for Jerry.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep you up to speed on everything we're able to bring to you from this second pro day over at the University of Alabama. A lot of other stuff to get into on the program as well today. You're welcome to join us at 205-342-9904 if you'd like to check in. Of course, it is a Tuesday. So Brent Beard coming up in the very next segment. We're going to go around the Southeastern Conference with Brent. We'll put a wrap on SEC men's basketball because it is a wrap following the Arkansas Razorbacks Elite Eight defeat at the hands of the Baylor Bears last night. 5, or was it 6, I guess, SEC teams in the NCAA tournament, and you had 2 get to the 16, 1 to the 8, and that was it. Arkansas last night with multiple trips in that second half to really make that game with Baylor interesting, just could not get a bucket when they really needed it. Got it down to 4, and then I think went through a stretch of 0 of 10 from the field. That makes it tough. Makes it tough to get over the hump. But give Arkansas credit. Got down huge. Baylor was every bit worthy of a 1 seed there in the first 10 to 15 minutes of that game last night. But Arkansas scrapped back in a very, very successful year. Year 2 under Eric Musselman, too. How about these year 2 coaches in the Southeastern Conference? Nate Oates, Eric Musselman, future is bright. How about the SEC West for a change? We talk so much about Kentucky and Florida, Tennessee, South Carolina made a Final Four not all that long ago. All about the SEC East. Of course, there's not divisions in basketball, but if there were in the footprints of the football divisions, it would have been a good year for the SEC West. 205-342-9904. Talked with Gary Harris about this in the previous half hour on his program. Tough one for Alabama softball last night, man. Go into the bottom of the 6th on the road up in Lexington with a 4-0 lead. You've got Montana Fouts in the circle. You've got Alexi Kilfoyle in Waite as a closer option, and both of them unable to hold down that 4-0 lead. Credit to Kentucky. 8-9 hitters there in the bottom of the 7th in a 2-run deficit. Go deep, and it is a 5-4 win for Kentucky in 8 innings up there. Alabama's first series loss in SEC play this season, an opportunity to bounce back quickly here coming up in just the next couple of days. So we'll see if the Crimson Tide can do that. We're going to step aside for our first break. When we come back, as promised, Brent Beard of College Sports Today and First Coast News. He'll join us on the program. Throughout the program, We will update you as best we can from Pro Day over at the University of Alabama. Crimson Tide football team back at work later this afternoon. It's football o'plenty over off Bryant Drive today between Pro Day, between the Alabama 2021 edition getting back to work. You got a scrimmage coming up here at the end of the week at Bryant-Denny Stadium, so it's all starting to happen where football season, and it's impending arrival coming up. Before you know it, we'll be talking about Miami and the Hurricanes on September the 4th over there in Atlanta, Georgia today. Back with more of Southern Fried Sports on a Tuesday, presented by Peterbrook Chocolatier right after this.
From the University of Alabama, this is Crimson Tide Today. It's a daily update on Bama sports, and it's brought to you by Dex Imaging, the official copier and printer provider for Alabama Athletics. Hello again, everybody. I'm Roger Hoover. Alabama football will host its second Pro Day of the spring on Tuesday, as several Crimson Tide players showcase their skills for NFL scouts and personnel. Head coach Nick Saban gives his thoughts heading into Pro Day.
First of all, I'd like to say how proud I am of this group of young men, the kind of players, the kind of competitive character they had, the togetherness and the leadership that they gave our team is, I think, something that would benefit any organization or any team. So we always appreciate it when you guys pay attention to our players, and I certainly thank you for that. And we try to make it as hospitable as possible here at Alabama anytime the NFL is involved with anything that we do here.
I'll have more in a moment.
Tradition is built by doing the right things over and over again. At Alabama, this means 27 SEC championships and 17 national titles. Well, at Dex Imaging, this means taking great care of our customers day in and day out. Dex Imaging has a tradition of providing quality office equipment at a fair price with quick, reliable service. Put Dex Imaging's tradition of satisfied customers to work for your business. Dex Imaging, the official copier and printer provider of the Crimson Tide.
If you missed last night's edition of Hey Coach, you can check it out on our Alabama Insider podcast, available on all podcast platforms. Baseball head coach Brad Bohannon gave us a recap of the Ole Miss series and looks ahead to this weekend against Tennessee in Tuscaloosa. Also, gymnastics coach Dana Duckworth previews the upcoming NCAA regionals meet. And that's your Bama update. Crimson Tide Today, brought to you by Dex Imaging. Crimson Tide Today is a production of the Crimson Tide Sports Network.
It's happened again in Alabama. A tornado emergency. One local radio company's stations broke in with life-saving information to help protect you and your family. That company was our company, Town Square Media. And here on Tide 100.9, we stand committed to do our part for the city and towns we love. When tornadoes touch down in Tuscaloosa, count on Tide 100.9 every time. Tide 100.9 Tuscaloosa weather.
Clouds increasing this afternoon, maybe a few isolated showers, the high 78. Cloudy tonight, the chance of scattered showers, the low 64. Tomorrow, cloudy, a good chance of showers, maybe a few strong thunderstorms during the day, the high at 70. I'm James Spann on the ABC 3340 Weather Center on Tide 100.9. It's 71 degrees in Tuscaloosa.
Tide 100.9. For more coverage of Alabama football, visit us at Tide100.9.com or download the free Tide 100.9 app.
The Crimson Tide will not be denied.
Edition of Southern Fried Sports right here on Tide 100.9 FM. Travis Ryer, senior analyst for BamaOnline.com, with you each and every weekday morning from 11 a.m. until noon. And on this Tuesday, as we typically do, we head to the Peterbrook Chocolatier studio line and check in with our great pal, Brent Beard of College Sports Today and First Coast News. Of course, we've told you many times before. Brent Beard, also a longtime voter for the Heisman Trophy. But, Brent, we start with some hoops as the SEC has vacated the bubble officially. up there in Indianapolis, Indiana. The Arkansas Razorbacks, a game Razorback team in the second half last night. Just too many empty trips, it seemed like, Brent. They got it to 4. They were in a position there beyond the midway point of the second half to really make that thing interesting with the Baylor Bears, but just couldn't quite get over the hump. A game that in some ways felt like Alabama and UCLA one night earlier.
Yeah, it sure did. We got behind by 18 points. Everything Baylor put up early on went in with it, didn't it, Trav? It was amazing the skill that Baylor has. 8-point game at halftime, 4-point game, and with a little under 10 minutes to go. But the Hogs really could not overcome that, lost the turnover battle 15-9, actually out-rebounded Baylor, frankly, and both teams shot around 50%, which is amazing, but Baylor took a few more shots. But the bottom line is it was a tremendous year for Arkansas, a tremendous year for Alabama, really for Arkansas that J.T. Notae fouled out when he did. That ended up being a real problem too. But, Trev, I think it's important for the league that teams beyond the ones that wear the Kentucky jersey are having this much success and really kind of validates what the SEC has done, frankly, in a short period of time.
It's pretty cool, actually, to see what would previously be referred to as the SEC West sort of carry the league in hoops for a change, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Frankly, it sure did, because your proverbial SEC East, Florida, Tennessee going out early, Kentucky didn't even make it, Missouri, I think had a better year than people realize, although a lot of those guys are in the transfer portal at this point too. So they really did a nice job. I mean, there's still some questions. I don't know if we're going to lose coaches necessarily this year. I know Frank Martin at South Carolina has had a meeting with the administration. Obviously, they were in the Final Four not that long ago. What was that, 2017? So maybe the equities is gone from that at this point. Half this Gator team seem like that they're going. So a lot in transition, but to get 6 teams in and get one to the Elite Eight, and frankly, Alabama should be playing tonight too.
When we talk sustainability with an emphasis on Alabama, and we've done that a good bit over the last day or so since that loss to UCLA, are you all in now with Alabama basketball moving forward under Nate Oates? Certainly there's been some runs in the past. 2004 comes to mind. Didn't feel empty, I wouldn't say, in the aftermath, because it was such a monumentous achievement at the time. But there was sort of this thought process, well, great, now what does it mean for Alabama men's basketball moving forward? Or are you feeling that this is something that is a long-term expectation for the program?
Yeah, this is different than what we've had, frankly, over some of the previous coaches, even Mark Gottfried, in the short success that he had with that. So, and it was smart for Greg Byrne to get a contract and the extension and the raise during the season. That certainly, with Texas and Indiana looking for coaches, guys like J.D. Davidson coming in next year. But I tell you, Trav, that this Shackelford, Quinterly, Ellis, Primo group that is coming back. I mean, as skilled as those guys are, and then now they obviously need a rim protector, and I think that's good. That will be there too, and they need to check in with Ray and Ballou. I would be fascinated to know where they're going with the strength and conditioning program, because they got pushed around too much, and there are a lot of things they need to work on. They weren't a real good passing team. They're hands weren't strong enough. The ball got batted away way too often. But look, those are things you can overcome. Frankly, Trav, I think that we may be in for a Wimp Sanderson type run, and maybe even better than that in the next few years.
Yeah, I think personally the surprise would be if this program doesn't transcend even what we've seen in some really good eras of Alabama men's basketball. Of course, that means ascending beyond the Sweet 16, because goodness knows Alabama has gotten stuck sort of in neutral when it gets to the round of 16. We're talking with Brent Beard of College Sports Today in First Coast News on a Tuesday edition of Southern Fried Sports. Brent, we'll get into some college football talk. I touched on this yesterday. The passing of Howard Schnellenberger. You talk about guys who laid foundations for great things to come, and you certainly expect that to be the case for Nate Oates where Alabama men's basketball is concerned. But when you look back at this dynasty that Miami blossomed into on the football field, from a program that was virtually extinct almost at the time that he took it over. Very interesting individual too, in Howard Schnellenberger. I don't think anybody would argue that.
No, he was quite a character, to say the least.
Eccentric.
Yeah, and certainly laid the foundation with Coach Bryant as far as his coaching acumen and what he was able to do. I mean, he got to Miami, help me on this, Trav, but he got to Miami in the late 70s.
79.
And they won a national championship in 83. And look, I would say, Trav, if he did not go to the USFL and stayed at Miami, now look, obviously Jimmy Johnson had his fair share of this. There's no telling how good that they would have been. Started the program at Florida Atlantic. I really thought that he probably really raised the level at Louisville considerably. I think I've shared this with you before, but one of the most amusing, most innovative things I've ever seen, Howard did a coaching show when he was at Louisville from a kindergarten class. He had kids that were around him. He was talking about Louisville football, and it was one of the more creative things I believe I've ever seen. But he had that in him, and I will still say, Trav, his not being in the College Football Hall of Fame, regardless of his record, which is around 500, when you accomplish what he did, he deserves to be in there.
He's kind of like if Nick Saban had stayed at LSU, you wonder what LSU might have done under Nick Saban instead of what has happened at Alabama under Nick Saban. You wonder for Howard at Miami if that had been the case.
Yeah.
And what people don't understand about Miami, and even to this day, the commitment to football isn't probably what you would think.
No.
And an emphasis on that in terms of resources. I think Miami and Florida State in those ways are pretty similar.
Mm-hmm.
Their brand recognition is huge for both the Hurricanes and the Seminoles. But for a guy like Howard Schnellenberger, who had been at Alabama, had been in the NFL, been around big-time football, Miami at the time, I can't emphasize enough, the state of that program. And even beyond Howard Schnellenberger, how far that program has needed to come just in recent years to get facilities and resources where they need to be in relation to how you perceive Miami football to be. Or, again, Florida State, the same way, too, with Jimbo Fisher, I think, was kind of reminiscent of that.
Now, Schnellenberger could bring in talent, and it was amazing who he could attract and how he developed them. And they're hoping now that and I'm still not convinced Manny Diaz can get it done. They brought in Ed Reed in a interesting position, but your point's a good one. If he would have stayed at Miami, I think he would have had enough influence to have really improved their facilities. And you're right, for both Florida State and Miami, and people don't get this, is the facilities still are not anywhere near where they need to be. Now, unfortunately, and I remember we were doing radio together when this happened, but he kind of bottomed out at Oklahoma and it was just not a good fit. It wasn't a good time in his life. But frankly, what he did at Florida Atlantic again was simply amazing. But Trav, this kind of fits his personality. But he was always the dapper one, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
Had that time, that suit coat.
Suited.
Trav, he may be 110, but he was dressed to the nines, wasn't he?
Had that pipe.
That's right.
Maybe even a half pint of Evan Williams and a coat pocket, perhaps.
Yeah. I don't think
those guys are officially gone, right? I guess your guy at Minnesota, he wears a tie up there, but the coat and tie guy, like the Johnny Majors, the Pat Dye on occasion, certainly Paul Bear Bryant, Howard Snellenberger. I guess we've officially moved on from that era of the dapper sideline apparel for head coaches.
And let me say this real quick. If anybody ever really wanted to know what Coach Bryant sounded like, except for Coach Bryant, you need to Google Howard being interviewed. And look, you remember this like I do. There was a lot of thought, Trav, that Howard and or Jackie Sherrill would one day be the head coach at Alabama. So, and it really kind of makes you wonder in Howard's prime, if he had gotten the Alabama job, where that may have gone. It obviously didn't happen, but yeah, without going into too much history here, there was a lot of thought, and listen, it was commonplace among beat writers that one of those guys would eventually take Alabama over.
Yeah, Howard in Louisville in that 91 Fiesta Bowl did a number.
Oh, yeah.
On Gene Stallings' first team. And Gene could go there in terms of giving you some of that Coach Bryant sound, but not as deep and guttural, I guess you could say, as could Howard Snellenberger. Unfortunately, around the SEC here in recent days, those dreaded three letters, ACL, have made some headlines, it sounds like, Brent.
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt about that. At Auburn, Jeremiah Wright, defensive tackle, who I heard an Auburn beat writer say yesterday, he was an offensive lineman and moved to defensive line, and they're short on the line of scrimmage in terms of depth and quality, as you know, and they were really counting on him, so that was a real disappointment. And the other one would have to be George Pickens. I know you've gotten into this, and they've got some depth, and I know that a lot of the Georgia beat writers are talking about how satisfied that Kirby is right now with his team. But look, Trav, you don't replace a George Pickens and get over that real quick either.
No, you don't. And you're right. We had just talked last week about Kirby being extremely optimistic, borderline giddy about where that offense had sort of ascended to this spring in comparison to some previous springs. I guess if you're Auburn too, there's been some good news in terms of an emergence of a fairly young wide receiver in Javarius Johnson, the Birmingham area product, and they also have one of these hybrid guys. I'm not going to say J.J. Pegues is Kyle Pitts-like. I think they're entirely different physically.
Right.
But I guess if you really look at it, he could be a tight end mismatch in his own right, just in a much bigger way, I guess, much wider way with J.J. Pegues.
Yeah, 6'2", 300. And by the way, a native of Oxford. How about that? Yeah. So he got out of the Grove somehow. But look, they are kind of using him a little bit of everywhere, maybe as a fullback on the goal line or in short yardage or as a blocking back or trying to get him out. I mean, he is but I think what they need to do, Trav, in situations like this is they need to get it beyond just being something unusual and a great story into a guy who can really help them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what's going to matter. And we talked about it. They need streams coming from someone other than Bigsby in the backfield. And you continue to be of the mindset until you see Bo Nix really effective from under center in this offense on a consistent basis, you'll believe it at that point. Drew Svoboda is a name that has propped up here in recent days following the sudden departure of Jay Graham as a tight ends and special teams coach at Alabama. First thing that stood out to me anyway, and checking out Svoboda's background, was the ties to the state of Texas, Brent, from a recruiting perspective.
Well, look, he is in that Houston area. I lived in Fort Worth for 3 years and understand that area, but the talent coming out of Dallas, Houston, and Texas is unbelievable. And certainly also got my attention, Trav. He was a high school coach. I know this was a high school level, but you know what football is in that state. Won 93 games in 10 years. Doesn't take long to do the math with that. But frankly, from some radio contacts in Memphis have said that he did a good job there, also with Mike Norvell and that crew. But look, it's all about recruiting, isn't it, pal? So Houston, Texas, to me, that's the bottom line where he was hired.
Absolutely. Those were the initial concerns when you lost Jeff Banks and Carl Scott. Not only were they exceptional positional coaches, coordinator in the happenstance of Banks where special teams are concerned, but especially where recruiting was a big thing and all that. The NCAA, a couple of important dates, I guess, coming up in terms of some issues that could be more laid out for us with I guess, more of an emphasis on the one-time transfer rule.
You know what? I saw today for the first time, and I thought this would be a slam dunk, but there were some tweets today from some guys who would know that there may be some real pushback from the coaches that they may not be ready for this, and who knows how this is going to go. Is this going to continue to be even more the Wild West than what we've got? And again, what we were talking about is the one-time transfer rule supposedly being addressed in April in the NCAA meeting. So that's going to be very interesting to see where that goes. If it passes or if they may table it is a possibility too. So we need to keep our eye on that one. And frankly, that may end up in a different direction than we thought it originally would be.
Henry To'oTo'o watch, I guess you could call it, around Tuscaloosa and Knoxville, where you consider that one-time transfer rule coming up here in the next month or so. What about the quarterback position with spring practice underway pretty much everywhere, or in some instances already wrapped up in the SEC? I see here where it looks like the Arkansas situation might be unfolding as expected behind center.
Yeah, that will be interesting to kind of see where that goes. KJ Jefferson is one of the better dual threat quarterbacks. I think he's had a good spring. Obviously, Felipe Franks had his 1 year, and that he is out. They've also got another guy named Hornsby who's gotten a little bit of action with that too. So I mean, it kind of seems like Jefferson may be the guy at Arkansas. And Trav, I've also had some people mention, and this is kind of something to file away for later, would be this Hendon Hooker at Tennessee, who transferred from Virginia Tech, that he may end up getting a real look. Now they've got a freshman, Cadian Salter, who's been suspended. And you mentioned To'oTo'o, who, by the way, is not listed on the latest Tennessee spring roster either.
Yeah. And we talked about some injuries earlier. Jalen Weidermeyer, a pretty big one. When you talk about SEC in general, the outstanding tight end for the Texas A&M Aggies, although it sounds like he should be fine by the time we get to really May, June, July.
Well, and listen, he's always a load, isn't he, Trav? And with him improved and the normal progression that we see, I'm sure Alabama will see enough of him when they go to College Station next year, won't they?
Oh yeah, going to see enough of him, Ainias Smith.
Yeah.
Enough of Isaiah Spiller.
Yeah. Yes.
Return some skill talent, no doubt, around a new quarterback situation. We'll see how that part plays out for Jimbo Fisher and the Aggies. As always, Brent, we appreciate you taking the time here on the program. Look forward to doing it again next week.
This is a sermon on another day, but Vanderbilt spending $300 million on football and basketball. And by the way, Trav, nothing's been done to that stadium, I understand, since 1981. I think it's time, don't you?
One of the biggest insults I've ever heard in relation to Vanderbilt's stadium is we used to have, for the company, we would have conferences there in Nashville at Vanderbilt in the Marriott that is essentially in the one end zone at Vanderbilt Stadium. And some of the publishers of the sites in Texas, like UT or A&M, the lobby of that hotel, you could pretty much see right into the stadium. And I had one of those guys say to me one morning over coffee, he goes, "Man, that's a nice stadium. Which high school plays in there?" The inference, of course, being that would be a high school stadium
and
in Texas.
As you know, in Texas, there are a bunch of them that are bigger than what Vandy's got.
That was I think that's where he was going for sure. All right, Brent, we'll do it again next week. Thanks, man.
Look forward to it, pal. Take care.
There he goes, Brent Beard of College Sports Today and First Coast News. If you haven't already, give a follow to Brent on Twitter at Brent Beard, BEAIRD. Back with more of a Tuesday edition of Southern Fried Sports right here on Tide 100.9 FM right after this.
You're listening to Southern Fried Sports with BamaOnline.com senior analyst Travis Reier on your home for Alabama sports. Tide 100.9 and streaming on the Tide 100.9 app.
Back with more of a Tuesday edition of Southern Fried Sports right here on Tide 100.9 FM. Travis Reier, senior analyst for BamaOnline.com, with you each and every weekday morning from 11 a.m. until noon. The show, as always, brought to you by Peterbrook Chocolatier out there at 1530 McFarland Boulevard North in the Indian Hills section of Tuscaloosa. Thanks, as always, to Brent Beard of College Sports Today and First Coast News joining us. We pretty much ran the gauntlet, covered the gamut of collegiate athletics with a special emphasis on the Southeastern Conference. $300 million going into Vanderbilt athletics. I think the Commodores previously budgeted that much for their baseball pitching staff where endowed scholarships were concerned. I think it used to be just $300 million for the pitching staff. But looks like a big commitment coming for the Commodores. We'll see. 205-342-9904 is the Peterbrook Chocolatier studio line. As we mentioned earlier in the program, the Alabama Crimson Tide football team back on the practice field later this afternoon. You're getting ready. Hasn't been a very newsy spring practice to this point, other than getting the availability status of some players to open spring drills from Nick Saban. Hasn't been, well, Jay Graham certainly qualified as newsy, leaving the staff after less than 2 months on the job. We talked with Brent, of course, in that previous segment about Drew Svoboda of the University of Memphis, potentially at least, being linked to that opening now, Svoboda, with those recruiting ties to the state of Texas. So that would make a sense. You've had some make some sense. You've had some guys with Memphis ties already pass through here, either Holman Wiggins, wide receivers coach, has previously worked at Memphis with Justin Fuente on that staff before Fuente went to Virginia Tech and Wiggins followed him up to Blacksburg. Ryan Silverfield, the head football coach now at the University of Memphis, was actually in that mix for the offensive line job here in Tuscaloosa back in 2019 after Brent Key had left to go to Georgia Tech with Jeff Collins. You had an opening both at the coordinator level. Mike Loxley became the head coach at the University of Maryland, and also the OC position. And Ryan Silverfield actually came to Tuscaloosa, interviewed with Nick Saban very early on in the process. The problem was that the staff, as it was expected to lay out, didn't exactly go as according to plan. So in reality, Ryan Silverfield in some ways was interviewing with the wrong people at the time that he interviewed for that offensive line job at UA. Dan Enos was expected, as you recall, at that point to transition into the job from Mike Loxley, and then Dan pulled a disappearing act, disappearing Dan Enos. Dan was there one day at the offices at the Malmore Athletic Facility, and the next day, Dan wasn't. Dan headed to Coral Gables to take over as the offensive coordinator. It turned out to be a cameo for Dan Enos down there with the Hurricanes. So Ryan Silverfield came to town, spent the day at the UA football offices, spent a lot of time with Dan Enos, and he leaves thinking, this is the guy I needed to impress because this is the guy I'm going to be working with if I'm the offensive line coach at Alabama. Well, Enos disappears, darts, heads to Miami. Silverfield is interviewed with the wrong guy, basically. Now, look, we understand Nick Saban makes the hires, but I'm thinking there was some feedback that was going to be expected from Dan Enos where that day spent with Ryan Silverfield was concerned. Didn't work out for Ryan Silverfield on that one. Ended up going to Kyle Flood, who had the association with Steve Sarkisian, who came in from the Falcons as well. And that's how things work in coaching business, in the coaching ranks from time to time. Worked out for Ryan Silverfield, though. Stayed at Memphis as associate head coach to Mike Norvell. Norvell gets the Florida State job. Ryan Silverfield gets promoted to the head coach at the University of Memphis. Oh, that carousel in coaching. Going to step aside for a final break. When we come back, we'll check in once again with Pro Day number 2 over at the University of Alabama. We'll do that and more when a Tuesday edition of Southern Fried Sports returns right here on Tide 100.9 FM right after this.
It's happened again in Alabama. A tornado emergency. One local radio company's stations broke in with life-saving information to help protect you and your family. That company was our company, Town Square Media. And here on Tide 100.9, we stand committed to do our part for the city and towns we love. When tornadoes touch down in Tuscaloosa, count on Tide 100.9 every time. Tide 100.9 Tuscaloosa weather.
Clouds increasing this afternoon, maybe a few isolated showers, the high 78. Cloudy tonight, the chance of scattered showers, the low 64. Tomorrow, cloudy, a good chance of showers, maybe a few strong thunderstorms during the day. The high, that's 70. I'm James Spann on the ABC 3340 Weather Center on Tide 100.9. It's 71 degrees in Tuscaloosa.
The flagship station for Alabama Crimson Tide football.
Alabama touchdown.
Only on Tide 100.9 and streaming on the Tide 100.9 app.
Columbus Day in 1945, slow hand. Eric Clapton. Take your pick from the catalog, man. Derek and the Dominoes, Clapton, Cream, Blind Faith. You're not going to go wrong with any of it. It is a Tuesday edition of Southern Fried Sports right here on Tide 100.9 FM. We have Pro Day aplenty on this Tuesday, both in Tuscaloosa and Ohio State. Jacob Harrison, I see where Justin Fields ran a 4.44 in the 40, according to One Watch up there in Columbus, Ohio. I don't know. Is that a surprise? Not to me, it isn't. Kind of expected him to run 4.5 or maybe better, didn't you?
Well, there was a video, or not a video, but a picture that was released just a few days ago where, Ohio State had their, a graphic or something that they have hung in their facilities, and it had Justin Fields at like a 4.38 or something like that. I'm not surprised that he runs a 4.44. What does surprise me is that's the number that came up on so many clocks when he clearly stumbled about 7 yards in.
Huh. That's a pretty fast stumble. That, I think in my 20s, at the right time in the early hours of a particular morning, I could probably stumble sub 4.4, Back in the early 90s, if you caught me at the right time, around 2:30 on some weekend mornings, I probably stumbled 4.37 on some watches. So I could see that with a stumble. You just had to catch me. You just had to catch me at the right time, or I guess you could say the wrong time in my life. But over at Alabama, kind of the big news this morning has been that Devontae Smith may give it a go with some routes. That's interesting because, Jacob, you've been working, I would think, primarily with guys that you plan on throwing to, right, in these scripted sessions. And even though you have as much time in the tank with Devontae Smith, you haven't worked with him much of late. So you can kind of look at that both ways. I look at it from the standpoint of probably Devontae Smith thinks he's going to help Mac Jones. Being out there with his guy might help with getting him comfortable. Again, all the time they have in together, going back to coming into Alabama in the 2017 recruiting class. Devontae still dealing with that finger situation that cropped up in the early stages of the second half of Alabama's win over Ohio State in the national championship game. So we'll see how that goes. And also saw some info, a picture, I guess, of Najee Harris with a heavily taped ankle. Not going to run the 40, but apparently going to go through some drill work and catch some balls, which will only reaffirm his status as a elite receiver out of the backfield, you would think. So you get Devontae out there, maybe Najee, and you kind of have the band back together in some ways. Don't have Jalen Waddle, but you'd have a couple of those guys. And you think about the setting over there right now. We outlined it earlier in the show. Bill Belichick, his offensive coordinator, Josh McDaniels. You've got Sean Payton, head coach for the New Orleans Saints there. Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch of the 49ers. No big deal, right? I guess it really isn't as much, though. This is another benefit of going to Alabama. When you get in these situations, especially as a quarterback, you're throwing the football in front of Nick Saban every day. How much more intense can it get? And Max seems like he's wired in a way in which it probably wouldn't bother him all that much anyway. But you think about maybe the basketball version of this, and you have private workouts and hoops. You have a combine in basketball. But it makes me think about the difference in notoriety where coaches are concerned, even coordinators. We even know most coordinators, or a lot of coordinators in the National Football League, right? You take a poll of 20 people at the corner of Greensboro and University right now at the lunchtime hour and ask them, Jacob Harrison, who's the head coach of the Los Angeles Lakers? the defending world champion Los Angeles Lakers. Who is the head coach? Not an assistant coach. Who's the head coach of the Lakers? How many people out of 20 right now in downtown Tuscaloosa, if you polled them, could answer that question, Jacob, do you think?
You gave me enough time to Google it, but I did not. I have integrity. I have no idea what the name of the head coach of the Los Angeles Lakers is.
Frank Vogel. But we'll call him from here on out, from this point forward, because of what you just said. He's Frank Google. Because you do. You have to Google the head coach of the Los Angeles Lakers. So, like, if you play at Duke and you play for a brand in and of itself that is Mike Krzyzewski, or you play for Roy Williams, obviously basketball players, they know who NBA head coaches are. But it's just not even in the same universe, is it? If I've got to go shoot jump shots in front of Frank Vogel and I played for Mike Krzyzewski, that's definitely not going to impact me. Now, you play for Nick Saban, it's probably not going to impact you as much to be right there in front of Bill Belichick or Kyle Shanahan or Sean Payton. But if you play for someone in college football probably other than Nick Saban, you're going to feel that, I would think, a little bit more when you talk about the presence and the recognition value that is football coaches in comparison to others at the professional level anyway in basketball. Now, again, college basketball coaches, I think most fans associate teams with coaches in college more than they do even the schools themselves. Mike Krzyzewski is Duke basketball. Roy Williams is North Carolina basketball. Mark Few has reached a point, I think, now where he is Gonzaga basketball. Not so much players as coaches, but when you get to the professional level, I honestly, Jacob, I'm right there with you. If you ask me to name, I know that Stan Van Gundy is the head coach of the New Orleans Pelicans. I know that. But you get me beyond that. If you ask me to name the head coach of the last 4 or 5 NBA championship teams, I couldn't do it. I know Eric Spoelstra. I know him in Miami because he's been down there so long. But that's it. And maybe that's part of it too. The movement that you have at the head coaching level can be volatile at times. That's going to do it for a Tuesday edition of Southern Fried Sports. Thanks to Brett Beard for joining us on the program. Jacob Harrison, as always, doing a super job producing the show. The lunch whistle on this Tuesday. It is a Thai chicken pizza Tuesday. That's where I'm headed for dinner tonight. I am so looking forward to those Thai chicken pizzas. Really everything on the menu there at Heat Pizza Bar, downtown Tuscaloosa at Government Plaza. Frank and his staff, his crew, they are out of this world. Heat Pizza Bar, downtown Tuscaloosa at Government Plaza. Until 11 a.m. on Wednesday. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, everybody.